Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to my review of Watchmen, the Ultimate Cut, directed by Zack Snyder. Now, I have mixed feelings about this film. On one hand, I found it to be very ambitious, and I find that very admirable. You really have to admire Zack Snyder and the producers and all the other filmmakers involved in this project, especially for the Ultimate Cut, because they really put in a tremendous amount of effort in order to get this film to be as true to the graphic novel as possible as far as visuals go. However, in regards to the actual substance of the source material, I feel like Zack Snyder and his team fell short. But in regards to the visuals, they achieved that. They really did achieve the visuals in regards to transitioning the graphic novel into live action film. Now, Watchmen, the graphic novel, for me is easily the greatest graphic novel ever written. Not only is it a great graphic novel, but it's just a great novel, period. It literally is my favorite graphic novel, probably with The Dark Knight Returns coming in second. But I really love Watchmen because it is such a profound, refined, and sophisticated deconstruction of the superhero. And also, it's just a brilliant literary work. Alan Moore's writing is outstanding. And initially, when I found out that a film of The Watchmen was going to be produced, I thought it was ridiculous. I thought that a movie could never achieve the level of sophistication and refinement and just profound greatness that the graphic novel had. And my main reason for that is because the novel, it takes the superhero archetype and it deconstructs it, and it does in a way that is like very much like a psychological evaluation, and it does it in a way that's like peeling the layers of an onion, right? And I just couldn't see that translating well onto the screen. And what I love about the graphic novel is not only just the graphic novel portions of the book, but I love the in depth character studies, such as the excerpts or the chapters that we get from Night Owl's Under the Hood book, and other things such as Professor Milton Glass's study of Dr. Manhattan and things of that nature. So after every chapter in the graphic novel, there's these little character studies that dive deep into the psychology of the characters and what it means to be a superhero. So you have that going on concurrently with the main storyline, in addition to the pirate story that the young boy's reading. So, I mean, on face value, to think that you can transition all this into a film was just ridiculous to me. I didn't think it was possible. And this is why I got to give Zack Snyder and his team some credit, because they do, in a way, achieve that. However, for me, my reservations for this project are that they left behind the most valuable asset or the most valuable integral thing for the Watchmen graphic novel, and that is that it lacks the sophistication, it lacks that depth, it lacks that deep character study analysis. And rather, Zack Snyder, he transitions the visuals impeccably over, but I feel like there's something missing as far as that refined, sophisticated character analysis, that psychological peeling of the layers. I feel like it's missing in this film. The film lacks substance, and at times it feels a little bit silly and ridiculous, because I think that was one of the central points of the graphic novel, was to acknowledge that the whole notion, the idea of superheroes, it's a little bit silly. And that's why Alan Moore approached it in the way he did. And without transitioning that approach to the movie, I was left. There were scenes where I would watch this movie and I would be like, man, this stuff just looks ridiculous and it looks silly. I mean, just how they dress up as superheroes and go running around. I mean, sure, we've seen it before in other films, Avengers and other DC films, but in Watchmen, which is trying to approach it almost like how superheroes would be in real life, without Alan Moore's analysis and the way that he approached this with such substance, without that approach, it feels a little silly at times, this movie, and lacking. There was just something about the film that was lacking. And I find it very ironic that Alan Moore asked for his name to be removed from the credits of this film. Now, Alan Moore is the writer of Watchmen, and it's ironic because Dave Gibbons, the artist, is the only one that's credited for this film. And the reason why it's ironic is because this film achieved the transitioning of his visuals to the film medium. It did a great job in that. It truly captured Dave Gibbons' artwork, really did. However, it kind of failed as far as transitioning Alan Moore's deep, sophisticated character study of his characters and of the superhero archetype. It failed in that regard. And it's kind of appropriate that he asked for his name to be removed because at the end of the day, the film lacks substance. However, it achieved the visuals. So that's why I think it's really appropriate that Alan Moore is not credited, but Dave Gibbons is. And that's one of the disappointing things of this film because I'll be watching the movie and I'm quite impressed with how much the visuals really line up with the graphic novel. I mean, it's impressive. You know that these guys, Zack Snyder and his team, they studied it. You know they studied the graphic novel and tried to be as true to the graphic novel as much as possible, right? And I admire them for that. However, there's something off about the film for me. Now, I wouldn't say that it's an awful film. I wouldn't say it's a terrible film. But I will say that they missed the mark by a little bit. And the most important thing about this graphic novel, what makes the Watchmen graphic novel so special, that deep psychological analysis of what it means to be a superhero, the psychological study of all the characters, I feel like that's missing in the film. And if it is there in the film, it's done in a superficial way. And it's just all surface level stuff. So, in short, as far as the visuals and as far as like the surface level story, Zack Snyder, he transitioned that to film impeccably. But as far as that deep, profound character study, the psychological elements of the book, he missed the mark on that. Now, however, despite that negative criticism, there were some things I appreciated. Like, I appreciated how Zack Snyder, he would create scenes or visuals based off little discussions or maybe little details that are revealed in those character analysis studies in between chapters, and how he actually maybe waved the scene into the film, visually representing that. And I really appreciated that. The main example of that was in the opening screen credits, and how you have that montage recapping the history of the Minutemen or the Watchmen in this movie. And I thought that was awesome because I'm like, oh wow, I read about that, and now I actually get to see a little visual of that. That's awesome. Or things that were alluded to, and that was great. I think that was an excellent way of achieving something through the film medium that maybe wasn't done in the book, right? Another thing is the way that he used music at times was really cool, especially for the time period, right? Using some of the classic rock songs from the time and juxtapositioning them with scenes like from Vietnam and things of that nature. That was awesome. Now, I really think, as far as the actors go, I think the actors did a really good job. I really do. Jackie Haley, who plays Rorschach, was the highlight of this film. Rorschach is one of my favorite comic book characters of all time, and they really nailed him in this movie. He was outstanding. And the girl, the actress that plays Laurie Jupiter, another awesome casting. I really, really enjoyed her portrayal. I loved her costume. I mean, she just looked gorgeous in that thing. She was beautiful. And Jeffrey Morgan as Edward Blake, another outstanding casting decision right there. He knocked it out of the park. Um, Sally Jupiter, who was played by Carla Gugino, she did an outstanding job as well. Billy Crudup, or I don't know, I guess that's how you say his name. He did an outstanding job as Dr. Manhattan. However, Patrick Wilson as Night Owl and Matthew Good as Ozymandias, they were okay. They were okay, but at times it did feel a little bit like they came across a little bit like B movie ish as far as their portrayals went. I don't know if that's the directing. I've seen them in other films and they did a good job, but sometimes it just felt a little off. It felt like maybe a little too Batman Forever, Batman and Robin ish. Maybe it's the costumes, but something felt a little off at times. Like maybe they could have gotten a better actor to play these two roles. But I mean, it was nothing awful. Uh, in short, the acting was good enough. That's not the problem with this film. The cinematography for this film, as with all Zack Snyder movies, was beautiful. This film is beautiful to look at. Zack Snyder always does an exceptional job with visuals. It's the character department that he has trouble with. And, out of his whole body of work, this film doesn't have the biggest trouble with that. But it's just hard to transition the great elements of the book to film. So I feel like that is more of the shortcoming. It's not that they didn't have the capability to do it. I feel like in order to translate that deep psychological, profound greatness of the book, you have to be a really sophisticated type of writer in order to achieve that in the film medium. And Zack Snyder and his team, I guess they just weren't the guys to do it. However, again, the film has great acting at times. The film has great visuals. It looks like the graphic novel. And for that, I appreciate it. The way that they integrated the pirate story into the film. For some people, that may be jarring, but for me, as somebody who loves the graphic novel, I appreciated it. Now, in regards to the pirate story, the pirate animation, some people asked, some people that didn't like it, right? They really felt like it was jarring to the film because they didn't read the graphic novel. So this pirate story just comes out of nowhere, and they're like, "What the hell is this? This makes no sense. How does this contribute to the narrative that's being told in the live action portion of the film?" And they thought it was stupid. Some people just didn't get it. And it's not really clear cut as to why it's there, but I could let you know what I think, how I interpret it. For me, the pirate story, it's two things. To me, it's like it's paying homage to comic books, with the young kid reading the comic book, and it's also being used kind of as a device to link this humanity, this compassion, I guess, this empathy between him and the newspaper guy, the guy that sells the newspapers at the newspaper stand, and it's just a greater, it's just for a greater backdrop as for how humanity is. This kid goes there every day to read this comic. He doesn't pay for it, and it's not until the very end. It's not until they're killed do they know each other's names? And I think that's kind of part of it. But another part of it, and some people may not get this, some people may think I'm crazy or not interpret it or perceive it in this way. But for me, it's kind of a metaphor as to what happens to the villain of the film, Ozymandias, or whatever the hell his name is. Um, for me, in the pirate story, the main protagonist, he tries to save his family, but ultimately he's driven mad, and ultimately he ends up killing his wife in front of his kids, and he loses it. But the way the story sets out, it sets out with him going on a mission to save his family from the pirates that he thinks, that he assumes are going to go to his village and slaughter everybody there, including his family. So the mission starts out initially as one based on love, on him rescuing his loved ones. And then ultimately he goes insane, and he ends up being evil and ends up killing his wife and destroying his family and things like that. And to me, it's kind of a metaphor as to what happens to the villain, because the villain, he starts out as one of the Watchmen, and ultimately he resorts to this, I get, mass genocide. He resorts to mass genocide in order to save humanity. So he becomes a monster. He becomes a villain, even though he thinks he's a hero, or even though he set out to be a hero to save humanity, he ends up becoming a villain. And I kind of felt like there was a metaphor there. Some people may think I'm overreaching or looking at it in a wrong way or whatever, but that's what I take away from it. And that's why I really appreciate the pirate story being integrated into the ultimate cut of the film. It was a great way, it was a great attempt at trying to achieve that experience you get when you read the graphic novel. I thought it was great, honestly, because I there were times when I would watch this movie and be like blown away at the ambition and at what they were able to achieve. But the moments where I felt kind of let down was just, there was this overemphasis, I felt like, in the violence and in the gore. There were times where I would watch the movie and it would just be this gore fest, blood and guts and all that, and I would be like, man, I don't remember all that in the graphic novel. Like, what? Am I tripping? And I pull out the graphic novel, and yeah, there's some blood, but I mean, it was really quick, right? I mean, even if it was a bloody, bloody scene, it'd be one panel, two panels, and that's it. But the film kind of like beats it over the head, blood and guts. And that's where I kind of felt the most disappointed, because Zack Snyder, he brought this whole unnecessary thing to this Watchmen franchise. Right now, it's about gore and it's about guts and these overindulgent, silly sex scenes, and I'll get to that later. But here, let me just give you an example. In the graphic novel, there is no pulling out of the chainsaw or buzz saw to basically saw off the guy's arms. That's basically, he got his hands broken and he has him inside Rorschach's cell. So there's a scene where Rorschach, he's in his cell, another inmate's trying to kill him, and there's an inmate who's in the way because his hands are broken. And in the film, they basically hack off his arms with a buzzsaw, right? I don't know where they got this buzzsaw, but it's just pulled out of nowhere, and then it's all bloody and violent, and it's just unnecessary, and it's self-indulgent. Well, in the comic book, there is no saw. What the guy does is he cuts his throat, man. He cuts his throat, and that's it. Guy's dead. Get him out of the way so I can kill Rorschach. So when I think of this character pulling out this buzzsaw and just the unnecessary violence and gore and guts, it's like, look, man, this is what you're bringing. You couldn't bring the substance that Alan Moore had, so now you're just bringing this shallow-minded nonsense. That's how it came across to me. I'm not impressed with this unnecessary gore and guts. Everything has a time and place, but this does not have a place in Watchmen to me. Sure, the panel's bloody in the comic, but it's one little drawing and that's it. But the movie makes it seem like, man, you're getting pages and pages of violence, and that's not what Watchmen was about. So that's just one example. I got another example when Night Owl's beating the crap out of the top knot gangster because he feels like he was responsible for his mentor's death. In the film, he's beating the crap out of him, but in the comic, he puts his hands around his throat and he's just strangling him and he's upset. But in the movie, it's like, oh, I'm gonna beat the crap out of him. It's gonna be bloody. It's gonna be broken teeth. It's gonna be brutal. And I wasn't impressed. I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, man, like, this is what you're bringing here. Like, you don't get it, dude. Watchmen isn't about this. Watchmen is about something deeper. And now I have another example. So when Rorschach is recollecting when he turned, when he stopped becoming so merciful and became more ruthless, and he's describing how he killed that one guy that basically murdered that little girl with his dogs. In the movie, Rorschach takes a cleaver and basically just hacks his head repeatedly, like 10 times, just hacks and hacks and hacks at his head with this cleaver, and it's bloody and gory and ultra violent. But in the comic, he sets him on fire and he just walks away, right? I mean, for me, it's like we've basically substituted refinement and sophistication for blood, guts, and gore. That's what Zack Snyder did with Watchmen. And I didn't appreciate it. And the best way that I can basically describe how I feel is saying this: Watchmen is more unbreakable. Like that film Unbreakable by M. Night, whatever his name is, the one starring Samuel Jackson and Bruce Willis. Watchmen is supposed to be more like that, a character study of what it means to be a hero or a comic book hero. It's more unbreakable than it is Sin City, right? Watchmen is not Sin City, and I feel like Zack Snyder is trying to make it like Sin City with over the top violence and gore and ridiculousness. And it's not supposed to be like that. Now, I love Sin City, but guess what? That's how Sin City is. Sin City is crazy, over the top exaggeration of film noir. To me, that's what Sin City is. Well, Watchmen is not supposed to be like that, dude. Watchmen is supposed to be more like Unbreakable or Split or Glass, that trilogy, the Unbreakable trilogy, whatever they're trying to call it. And those films were not about violence. Those films were not about gore. Those films were about deep psychological studies of comic book characters or comic book heroes and villains. And look, Zach, you are getting it wrong, man. You're turning this into a gore action fest when it should be this deep, profound character study or deconstruction of what it means to be a superhero. And when he does try to do that, I feel like it's done in a very phoned in kind of way. But when it comes to the violence and gore, oh man, let's get into it. Let's dig our hands right into it. Let's get blood and guts and violence and all this stuff. So for the people that haven't read the comic or read the graphic novel, the level of action that's in this movie is nothing like it is in the graphic novel. There's way more action, way more blood and guts in the movie than there is in the graphic novel. And for me, that's a shortcoming. That's not a good thing. I would have much rather preferred more deep psychological thriller elements to this film than seeing blood and guts and all that stuff. And I'm not no Puritan. I watch samurai films with blood and guts all the time, but it's all about a time and a place. And this graphic novel was not about that for me. As I keep on saying, this graphic novel was a deconstruction of the superhero. It was a deep, profound psychological analysis of what it meant to be a superhero, right? And I feel like Zack Snyder missed that mark. He missed that. He missed that point. And another thing I didn't like was I feel like Zack Snyder and the writers took too much liberties in regards to their little social commentary about Richard Nixon. I feel like they demonize him way too much. Now, yes, I'm well aware that there's politics, this political, cynical satire attitude within the Watchmen graphic novel. However, for me, it's split evenly down the middle. Like this cynical attitude towards politics, it's seen in conservatives and liberals in the book. And you kind of get a little bit of this satire approach to liberals in the film as well. However, I feel like all these scenes with Richard Nixon, it just makes it too much. It makes it a little bit too like biased. Whereas in the comic book, it was well balanced. That's why it was so accessible because there was this cynical attitude towards American politics in the book. However, in the movie, even though you get a little bit, you get some of both, it is more of this cynical attitude towards right wingers or whatever, conservatives, Republicans, and is especially there with all this Richard Nixon stuff. They try to demonize him too much. Now, the main reason why I don't like this is because, look, let's get beyond political. Let's get historical, right? So, in all these Hollywood movies, I'm not going to try to get too partisan, but let's just say in all these Hollywood movies, they really, really, really love to demonize Richard Nixon for the Vietnam War. Now, hey, whatever, man. I don't like the Vietnam War either. In retrospect, I wasn't alive at the time. However, all I have is retrospect through history and reading. And the point that I'm trying to make is look, who escalated the war in Vietnam? It wasn't Richard Nixon, it was Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat, right? All because of this Gulf of Tonkin incident, which some historians question didn't even take place, or maybe there was a distortion as far as a recollection of events. Whatever, there's a controversy there. And the escalation of the war happened under Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat president. And in these Hollywood movies, all you hear about is how evil Richard Nixon is because of the Vietnam War. We compare him to the emperor, and we compare him to a dictator, and etc., and etc. Look, hey, that's fine, but you got to have a balance, man. Lyndon B. Johnson escalated the war. So where's all this cynical satire attitude towards his administration? You don't see it in Hollywood movies, right? And this is why I got a problem with this excessive demonizing of Richard Nixon in this film. I mean, you got all these scenes with Nixon and Kissinger, and none of that stuff is in the comic book, dude. That's what the point I'm trying to make. It was too much for me. Yeah, Nixon is mentioned in the graphic novel. He's in the background and everything, but there wasn't these scenes, and there wasn't. It was just too much. Too much of this, like anti-Nixon, maybe anti-right wing, whatever. It had to be balanced, right? You get the whole like kind of like cynical attitude towards liberalism through the character Rorschach, through his voiceover and stuff, which is great. But I feel like adding that Nixon stuff just overdid it with the commentary on the right. And can I just take this opportunity to just say how corny and lame that sex scene was between Jupiter and Night Owl? That thing was so cringeworthy. And it came out of left field too because the entire film has been pretty well executed as far as the visuals and the tone. And then all of a sudden, we get the most cliche sex scene ever with the music. And I know I said earlier how I appreciated how this film juxtaposition music with certain scenes, but not with this. This right here was just it was just bad. It was just awful. And I've seen the film maybe 3 times, and I liked it a lot when I first saw it, but then after I kind of felt like there's something missing, which is kind of what I've been saying, but I always hated this sex scene. Like when I saw this sex scene in the film in the cinema, I was like, what the hell is just happened? It almost felt like a comedy. It felt like Zack Snyder was making fun of sex scenes, right? Like it goes into that whole like midnight Showtime Cinemax softcore porn thing, but with this weird music playing, and it was just like, what the hell is this, dude? Like it was embarrassing. I felt embarrassed watching it. It was awful. It was that sex scene is the worst thing about this movie. The worst thing ever. I mean, if you just took that sex scene out, it would improve the film immensely. That's how bad it was to me. I mean, I don't know what was going on, but it has to be talked about. And as much as I think how Jupiter just looks smoking hot, she's beautiful, but it's just the way it's directed. It's comedic. And it totally threw the tone of the film off, man, because you got all this serious stuff going on, right? And it was just awful. So I just had to mention that. Now, as far as the ending is different than it is in the graphic novel. And initially, when I heard about the ending, I was kind of like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. But in the context of the film, it makes way more sense. So, long story short, in the graphic novel, the villain stages this alien invasion by basically kidnapping the world, some of the world's greatest artists, in order to stage this alien invasion. When I say artists, I'm talking about artists like, people that paint, and also artists that are into animatronics, or just anything required to make an alien invasion look like it was a real thing, right? But in the movie, rather than an alien invasion destroying Manhattan or whatever, it's Dr. Manhattan. So Dr. Manhattan is the excuse or the reason given as to why Manhattan or New York was basically annihilated, almost like nuclear explosion, right? So the world unites against Dr. Manhattan. And in the graphic novel, it's the world unites, or Russia and the United States, they unite to fight against this alien invasion, which will prevent this terrible, terrible war that was peaking at the height of the Cold War. This war, this nuclear war between the United States and Russia, it's now prevented. The world is saved at the expense of the loss of millions and millions of people, right? And it's kind of the same in the live action film version, only it's Dr. Manhattan. So Russia and the United States unite against Dr. Manhattan because he's become this big, I guess you want to say, he's become something larger than any nation. He's a threat to humanity, not just the United States, not just Russia, right? And that kind of was the point in the graphic novel with the aliens. Despite the guy's name being Dr. Manhattan, honestly, even though I'm giving some credit to the film for its little change, a part of me feels like, well, since the guy's name is Dr. Manhattan, I'm pretty sure some of the world would blame the United States for that. They'd be like, this is your fault because he's from the United States, but I digress. So that's basically my short and concise review as to some of the things I loved about Watchmen, some of the things I didn't like, and some of the major shortcomings for the movie, which is they missed the mark, man, as far as that deep psychological evaluation of the characters and the deconstruction of the superhero. However, the film has great visuals. If you love the visuals for the book, you'll be more than happy with what you get. The acting is good for the most part. The cinematography is beautiful. The action, if you love action, this movie has good action. It's got blood and guts and all that. But like I said, that's not why I go to Watchmen for. I don't go to Watchmen for blood and guts and violence. I go to Watchmen to have thought provoking ideas be presented to me. So at the end of the day, I gotta give this film a C plus. It's watchable, sure, and some parts are enjoyable. But as a huge fan of the graphic novel, There's something missing, and I can't deny that. If you've never read the graphic novel, I highly recommend that you do. If you haven't read the graphic novel and you enjoy the movie, well, then I could totally see how this is a B plus or even an A for you, because you just don't know. You just don't know. You haven't read the graphic novel yet. But see, I have. I grew up reading that graphic novel. I read it numerous times and I adore it. So that's my review of Watchmen, the ultimate cut. Highly ambitious, some great acting, beautiful cinematography, but it misses the mark as to the most important elements of the book. They're just not there. That deep psychological study of what it means to be a superhero. Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, people. One love.